how we get to our mastermind, Sybil. Next contestant, Sybil 40 from Torquay. Special subject, the bleeding obvious. I wasn't going to let it go.
Hello, and welcome back to Watching Brief for the week of the 18th of September 2022. I am joined, as ever, by my probably slightly worse off, almost certainly not one of the headline better off people following this morning's budget. How are you doing, Mr. Andy Brockman?
I'm fine. What makes you think I'm not in the £150,000 a year plus tax bracket who's just been given handed a 5% tax cut?
Well,
actually, no. Let me go back on that. I'm an archaeologist and I'm a writer. So yeah, of course I'm not going to be in the set.
Exactly. It reminds me of this is the second time I've had cause to remember this quote in the past couple of weeks, actually. But in Stephen King's 1408, the movie as well, 1408, Samuel Jackson, the manager of a hotel, says to the writer protagonist, "Can I offer you a drink? Do you drink?" And he goes, "Of course I drink. I just told you I'm a writer." But anyway, regardless of our alcoholic crutch or not, our Watching Brief continues, and this morning, in fact, hot off the press, we have some news of what was being billed as a mini budget, but really it had all the hallmarks of a major economic change of course. It's been on the horizon for a while now, during Liz Truss's leadership campaign for the Conservative Party, and therefore Prime Minister, becoming the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And it also coincides with a report, a poverty report, which was published by BAJR, the British Archaeological Jobs Resource, earlier this week. It's I thought that made for interesting, as some people were saying, bleak reading. But combined with this budget and what it hints at, it could be a double whammy. Shall we?
We are going to have so much fun. People are going to leave with their heads held high, with a skip in their step as they walk away from their devices, having watched the Watching Brief.
Yes.
They are going to be so elated and elevated. It's going to be magical going into the weekend.
If I were an archaeologist, that kind of thing. Yeah, they're going to be very happy, very happy. Yeah. So I guess we're starting with Kwasi Kwarteng and his budget, mini budget. What
Kamikaze economics, as somebody has christened it.
Oh, okay. I've heard Trussonomics this morning.
I think Kamikaze is much better. It's funnier.
Yeah,
and probably more accurate.
Yeah, exactly. So, what is the hot tips and takeaways from this budget? Well,
this has been rushed through in the 4 days since the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II on Monday. Basically, politics was on hold for almost two weeks, at a time when the new Conservative Party leader, Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister, would have been expected to try and establish her brand, if you like, to establish her authority, to establish where she was wanting to take the country. That's been on hold for 2 weeks, but which hasn't stopped the government and Chancellor Kwarteng in particular from leaking, previewing, hinting at most of the elements in his people have been rather cynically calling it a special budgetary operation.
Yeah. Well, also you say brand. I mean, a brand is also a searing, hot, painful thing, as well as being a signature.
I'll come to that in a minute. But basically, when Kwasi Kwarteng got up on his feet at 9:30 this morning in the House of Commons to deliver his statement, and it's been delivered in a way which means that the government hasn't had to basically provide the working for its homework. In that normally a major budgetary statement like the one Kwarteng gave today would be accompanied by what's called the Red Book, a very thick Treasury document explaining the working of all the policies and the implications of all the policies, and so on and so on and so on. None of that is necessary because of the way they brought this forward.
No.
to the extent that actually what the first Conservative MP up on his feet when Kwarteng sat down was the chair of the Treasury Select Committee, who said there was a gaping void at the centre of the statement, and asking the Chancellor to issue whatever forecast he had got on his desk, which he knew he had on his desk, at which point the Chancellor refused to do so and said that there would be a full review in due course, which of course doesn't help anyone trying to analyse what's going on now.
No.
Basically, what to put it bluntly, Kwarteng and Truss were part of a group of young ministers and MPs in the early noughties who wrote a book called Britannia Unchained. It's famous for containing the quote that the British workers are the worst idlers in the world. Now, two of the people who co-wrote that book, which was basically a program for the marketization of the British economy, to turn it into a sort of cross between America and Singapore. And
just to be clear to folks at home who don't know what that means, that implies an economy that's geared towards high earners, that reduces the rights and, for example, increases the hourly provision that low earners have to put up with. So you have less working rights, and you're expected to work harder for less, for longer. And also, as well, implications such as having tax-free status or tax haven status just off the European continent, i.e., just outside the Eurozone, in theory, would also mean that the economy could run quite hot, but seemingly hot only for those high earners, so people involved in the financial sector, so on and so forth.
Well, I mean, to be fair to them, and people who are regular viewers of the Watching Brief will know I'm not normally inclined to be fair to the government. I'm certainly not the current government. But they would argue that by growing the economy, by removing regulation, which is essentially what we're talking about, we're talking about a deregulated economy. A deregulated economy enables faster growth, which then benefits everybody, with the theory being that if the economic pie is bigger, everybody, even the lowest paid, can have a larger slice. Now, that is highly controversial, even among economists.
Sorry, I'm just hitting myself in the face with a board there. Go on.
No, it's sometimes being called trickle-down economics. And in fact, very helpfully for the Prime Minister earlier on this week, President Biden tweeted out that he was sick to death of people talking about trickle-down economics.
I know how he feels, but anyway.
So basically, what
concussion.
So basically, what Chancellor Kwarteng was doing today was making some announcements, like, for example, removing the 45% rate of income tax, which is only paid by the top earners earning more than £150,000 a year, and so that now somebody earning £50,000 pays the same rate of income tax as somebody who earns millions. And so that is happening. There were a few sweeties for the for I won't say the proles, for the lower paid members of society, in that there's going to be a 1 penny cut on income tax coming in next April, on the basic rate of income tax, and the duty that was going to be put on beer, wines and cider has been binned. So if nothing else, if we can still afford it, we can at least go and drown our sorrows slightly more cheaply.
I mean, but in all seriousness, in the context of that Britannia Unchained book, what does that say about what they think about the British people? That we're slovenly drunkards who will overlook tremendous tax cuts for the extremely wealthy because we get to continue to pay what we currently pay for alcohol. I mean, it's not great. It's not great. And also, I should say, the reason why we're talking about this week is because it also impacts archaeology and heritage. So we're not Yeah.
No.
Go
No,
on.
that's what I was going to come on to.
Then
Now,
again, archaeologists
most
do stereotypically drink a lot, I suppose.
yeah, but on the other hand, very few of them, as we'll discuss later on in the show, earn north of 150 grand a year. No, look, most of the issues that will impact on archaeology were previewed today, but there is very little actual detail.
Yeah.
One or two bits and pieces, which I'll come to in a second. But the principal thing that Kwarteng announced was that they were going to the government is going to bring forward proposals to using the word that the government prefers, liberalize planning laws. This is part of a wider effort to what's called sunset, i.e. end law that has been derived from the European Union, from Britain's time within the European Union, which you quite rightly pointed out when you tweeted this out, laws which Britain helped draft.
Yeah.
They're largely laws around things like workers' rights. So things like the working time directive, which limits the amount of hours that your boss can force you to work a week. But also things like the environment directive, which basically burns into law the polluter pays principle on which developer-funded archaeology stands. Now, we don't know what those proposals will be. I think the nervousness is that in a sector where something like 65% of the income of developer-funded units comes from building work and roughly 35% from transport and other infrastructure work, those income streams will start to be curtailed because less environmental impact assessments, less excavation prior to a site being redeveloped and so on will be required. These are costs that developers have always, by and large, at least, sort of balked at. They see it as an additional tax. And I think the signs are that the government is seeing it the same way. And Dig for Archaeology and other groups can say we're not red tape as much as they like. Unfortunately, that's not the way it's seen outside by certain players in this particular story.
But can't we just go and become king with an archaeology degree? Won't that solve all our problems?
He studied archaeology and anthropology and majored in history in the last year. He wasn't. Our king has many talents and has many interests, including archaeology and history. But he's not an archaeologist in the sense that any the professional archaeologists watching this are.
No,
it doesn't mean he's not sympathetic, and it doesn't mean he might. He may even fly the flag for archaeology behind closed doors when he has conversations with Liz Truss. But
also, crucially,
contrary to what you might have read on some social media accounts last week, he's not an archaeologist.
But also, crucially as well, there can only be one king at a time. So the reason why I say that, folks, is just to say I get the joke that was going around last week. But some of the notable proponents of that joke this week are saying, oh my goodness, if you get rid of planning, archaeology dies. That's why I didn't find that joke funny last week. But regardless, how seriously are we to take this stuff? Because I mean, in recent Watching Briefs, we've talked about free ports, for example. We use the example of, was it Plymouth, I think?
Yeah.
And the sheer swathe of land that was being proposed in terms of exemptions from restrictions, as they might say, but other people might say protections. How likely is this actually to get through Parliament? Because we've also said previously that actually lots of Tory backbenchers work for people who they were voted in by people who live in these leafy heartland English southern counties who won't necessarily want to see planning rolled back. They will want to see their local cottages and the aesthetic of the village maintained. So how likely are we to actually see this happen?
We mustn't see this just as a Southern English thing.
No.
These plans impact on your area, the Northeast, the West Midlands, the Northwest.
But with respect, they can be sold to people in the Northeast of England as an income element. For example, in Newcastle, we've always had, I say we because I've lived here for quite a long time now, always had a very pragmatic relationship with heritage. The city centre, for example, of Newcastle has been bulldozed in ways previously that wouldn't be tolerated in a town like Bath, for example. So the reason why I mention the south of England is I think the most actual pushback is likely to come from those backbenchers, especially considering this is going to be they're going to try and push this through using that Conservative majority in Parliament.
Well, and this is where it gets interesting. Kwarteng and Truss and the people around them, and in fact, I include in that the backroom staff at Downing Street and the Treasury, many of whom come from what are often called think tanks. But these are opaquely funded organisations. The most high profile of them in the current government, in the Truss government, is the Institute of Economic Affairs. They are right-wing libertarian in outlook. They're deregulators, they're tax cutters. They work for a very particular part of society. The Truss and Kwarteng are behaving like a group of children who have been sat outside the toy shop at Christmas waiting for it to open so they can run in and spend all their Christmas money at once.
And by spend money, they mean redistribute money upwards.
To the better paid, with the idea that it'll trickle down to bigger pie, therefore bigger slice for everyone.
Yes,
that's how that just right.
Bigger cars, therefore more people needed to wash them. Yes.
Yeah. So that basically, Truss has a maximum of 2 years before she has to call a general election. So they are trying to get as much done as irrevocably as possible, as quickly as possible. And I think she's expecting to use the Tory majority of, I think it's in the mid-70s now because of various defections and suspensions and things like that. But she's got two problems. One is that she only won the support of about just over a third of the party going forward into the in the recent leadership election. She picked up other support later, but that was because she was seen to be the front runner and was likely to win. So it's as Beth Rigby, the Sky political editor, put it, her support in the party, it's soft.
In the parliamentary party, that is.
In the parliamentary party,
MPs,
it's soft. Amongst MPs, it's soft. And another political editor, Pippa Carrera from The Guardian, noted this morning that when Kwarteng sat down, that from the Tory backbenchers, who are they're not what's called the payroll vote, the ones who'll vote for the government come what, because their jobs and their higher incomes depend on it, their ministerial cars and so on. The backbenchers, who are basically constituency MPs, she pointed out that there was only the odd half-hearted cheer and lots of glum faces. And then she quoted a Tory MP as telling her, "I've never known the party as divided so soon after a leadership election." You know, she only became prime minister effectively 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So, you know, none of this is a done deal. We're likely to see some very tough politics over the next 6 months or so, against the background of, you know, an incredibly difficult world situation with the war still going on in Ukraine and Putin's threats in the last few days, the mobilization of Russian men, and today's illegal referenda in the occupied parts of Ukraine. Against that, the energy crisis, where people are still going to see massive rises in their energy bills, even with the government's energy cap. And amongst all of this, we're looking at roundabout early double-figure inflation at the moment. Higher interest rates. So anybody who's got bank loans and mortgages is going to be paying more. We're in for a really rough ride as a country. How the political system responds to it, I think, is entirely up for grabs. As far as getting back to archaeology, I think there have been times when we've cried wolf, and then over things like changes to planning laws and so on. Most recently, when Robert Jenrick, honest Bob Jenrick, was the community secretary, when the government tried to introduce zonal planning. That is effectively what Truss is trying to bring in again. Now, previously it was defeated. Backbenchers just wouldn't have it. They started losing by-elections to the Liberal Democrats.
Yeah.
We will see whether that still plays. To give you an idea of how widely this is at stake and how widely developer-funded archaeology could be affected, there's an appendix in the government's planning plan for growth, as it's called, that they published this morning to go with Kwarteng's speech, and it's something like 35, 38, something like that, mid-30s local authorities, large local planning authorities, who could see these high growth liberalized planning systems coming in.
Notably,
so basically,
one of them is in Teesside, which is the location of the Dorman Long Tower that we were thinking of talking about this week,
and we will be talking about soon. Still,
yes, yeah.
Teaser.
Teaser, Teesside teaser, yay! Sorry, go on.
See what I did there?
Yeah. You teed it up.
In all seriousness, Teesside, the Teesside Freeport, has been a flagship for this under the previous Chancellor, Rishi Sunak. This has been described as freeports on steroids.
Yeah.
In terms of the potential for deregulation.
Yeah. A watching brief is a formal programme of observation and investigation to record and report on notable discoveries on an archaeological site. As part of our ongoing watching brief, Andy and I work hard to bring you the best, the worst, and sometimes the more quirky happenings from the world of archaeology. We aim to provide a space where voices can be heard, opinions shared, and sometimes truth spoken to power. If you believe in the work we do, please consider supporting us on Patreon for as little as $1 per month. Thank you. It comes at the same time on the 21st of September. BAJR, the British Archaeological Jobs Resource website, bajrfed.co.uk, published a report called Archaeologists in Financial Crisis, BAJR Survey 2022, with the subtitle Poverty Impact Report. You say that the country, that the people of Britain are in for a rough ride. How much rougher is the ride set to be for our brothers, sisters, cousins, and others in the archaeological sector?
Right. Now, before I start talking about this, and I've just published a piece about the report today, actually on the pipeline, and we'll link to it below, as we'll link to the report and the data set and comments that we'll publish with it, because it's worth a stiff drink and some of anybody's time to read it. Actually, it's an important piece of work. It's not a perfect piece of work, but it's a very important piece of work, I think.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important to make the point that we're not just talking about archaeologists here, because these impacts are on any low-paid workers. In handing out the tax cuts today, the Chancellor didn't uprate benefits for people on low incomes or out of work in line with inflation, for example.
No.
So their incomes are being cut. So,
well, and in fact, the rhetoric surrounding it was one that sort of presumed that anyone on benefits isn't gainfully employed. Most people on benefits are in fact already employed,
including many archaeologists on the lower tiers of the profession.
Exactly, yeah. So tax rebates and so on and so forth, and tax benefits. But also as well, that came in the implied punishment bracket of if people are looking for a job and they haven't found a job, regardless of its quality or their suitability for it, we'll remove their benefits, basically is what he's saying. So this Britannia Unchained, you lot of work shy slobs, get to work is heavily implied in this morning's announcements.
Exactly, and in fact, as well, I'll just make one more point very quickly there. Many people who aren't formally in work are actually working, for example, as unpaid carers. So this is really dark, important, nutty stuff that we're talking about here.
Well, and also we should say as well at the same time that they've also reversed a national insurance hike that was designed to help pay for social care. So they've reduced money that will pay for social care, and they're implying that people who currently are unpaid care workers will be forced to go and get a random ass job and leave people vulnerable, even more vulnerable. But regardless, we are an archaeological focused news aggregate, as it were, and commentary show. So this report is welcome. It's a very good data set crystallizer. It does, however, state really what we've all kind of already known for quite a while.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I opened the article I've written about it by saying, who would work in a graduate entry profession where the average income for a single worker employed by a commercial contractor falls below the national median wage, the national average wage, by as much as £12,700 and an average of £8,500. And the answer is basically Britain's professional archaeologists. Now, we can argue for a long time, and probably in another place, about how this has come about and why this has come about. And I do make the observation that, and I think we might be possibly doing it in the thumbnail for this video, that in a sense the report falls into the BAJR 40 specialist subject. It's the statement of the bleeding obvious. We've known about this for years. People have complained about poor paying conditions in archaeology for years. But it does seem that now, with the cost of living crisis, with inflation, with the energy crisis and so on, things are all coming to a pretty unpleasant head very quickly. The BAJR report, it was launched in July. It asked people to basically fill in a basic questionnaire about the impact of financial issues on their lives, both personally and as archaeologists, and also impacts on things like their mental health and well-being, their sense of self-worth and that kind of thing. The report does actually come with a content warning, particularly the elements to do with the personal testimonies. They're anonymized, but some of them are incredibly powerful. I mean, I'll just a couple of quotes. This from one respondent. Our pay is now the worst in the construction field. We are treated no better than disposable staff to be paid as little as possible. Now, two things I pull out from that. One is the obvious one about the worst in the construction field, the worst people in a multi-billion-pound industry, the development and construction industry. But the second part of that, we're no better than disposable staff to be paid as little as possible. That perception is a perception of the archaeological employers. That person believes that their employer, their archaeological unit, believes they're disposable and should be paid as little as possible. That's a problem for a start. Self-employed archaeologists have equal problems. And a self-employed archaeologist wrote, self-employed specialists. As a self-employed specialist, I haven't put my rates up for ages. If I put in a quote which truly reflects my time and expertise, or frankly even half of it, I get asked if I can reduce it. I would seriously get paid more for shelf stacking, and it increasingly looks like an option. Now, again, the person who is asking that specialist, that highly experienced specialist, to cut their day rate or their job rate is likely to be another archaeologist working as a consultant for the developer or for the contracting unit. So we are dealing with a really complex,
or at the very least, someone who is exposed to the sector. They all know that they're asking for a pittance.
I mean, the report found that over 3/4 of the early careers practitioners responding to the survey reported a negative impact on their mental health caused by the pay and conditions they were being forced to undergo. Almost half of the single respondents and a fifth of the families who responded, archaeologists who were part of family units, reported they were experiencing some form of food poverty. That just, to pause for a second and let that sink in. People in a almost 100% graduate entry profession cannot work in conditions where they avoid food poverty. And there's another point that leapt out at me from the report, which is again, it's not in the main text. It's in the in detail. It's actually, if you read the respondents' comments, but it's the number of people who report that they're only able to remain in archaeology as graduates, as professionals working in professional commercial contracting units. They're only able to remain in that field because they have a life partner who is working in another better paid profession. Somebody said, I'm only in a reasonable financial position as my partner is a part-time proper doctor. Now, okay, look, there are one or two issues with the report. It's a self-selecting sample, but on the other hand, it's round about 10% of the people known to have been working in professional archaeology at the most recent Profiling the Profession report at the time, 2 years ago, at the time that report was compiled. So it's likely to be broadly representative. It's also likely to be skewed towards contracting units and professional field workers, but then that's BAJR's constituency. Again, it doesn't invalidate the data because it's talking about what is actually going on in the sector.
Well, but and also, to be fair, I mean, I and other people I've seen have been sharing this. We're sharing the call for respondents as far on mind as we could. So, in that sense, hopefully, it has reached a little bit beyond that specific community. But yeah, it's not surprising. I know people who are in food poverty. I know people who are relying on their grandparents raiding their refrigerators to get food. I know archaeologists who for years now have felt not only economically underpaid, but also the mental health impact of not being the perception being not pulling your weight, as it were, within your own household. Even if you have the most supportive partner in the world, and most archaeologists, I think, do tend to have lovely people that they love and that are loved by them. And despite all of that, it ends up feeling a little bit like, for many people I've talked about this with, like you're sort of subject to a kind of ethical goodwill. A sort of oh well, this is fundamentally a good thing that you're doing as an archaeologist, so we'll give it a little bit of wriggle room. Frankly, it's akin to how people talk about, for example, nurses and carers. Oh well, you want to do it, don't you? Because you've got a good heart. Well, that's true, but obviously also one cannot live by goodwill alone, and this report absolutely underscores that.
As was said often during the COVID pandemic about health workers, you can't cook claps.
No, you can't. Exactly, you can't cook claps. You also can't. You can't nibble on people visiting National Trust properties, for example.
No.
It's
no.
Yeah. So this, in the context of what we've been talking about now for years. Things like approaches to the planning sector, things like government essentially seeing due process in planning as an inconvenience, not to mention, for example, the culture war elements, not to mention even more broadly, actually, people who have been at the top of our sector for a while now. For example, I remember a former head of, as was English Heritage, putting out the call, across the world to get archaeologists to come here to dig for HS2, like that would be the golden goose that saved the sector.
Yeah.
Given that it's probably not going to be particularly productive to relitigate these arguments and say you guys have been asleep at the wheel, how can we helpfully move forward? For example, I'll if I quote the head of BAJR's, David Connolly's text message tweet on this. Hashtag enough is enough. It's time we all work together. With a link to this report, as linked below. I will be observing the industry working group on the 19th of October, and like many other fab people there, I suspect this report will be a suitable focus that can't be ignored. Is that a start?
It's a start, but it's nowhere near a finish. Look, let's just look at the way the report was met when it was released earlier in the week. It got a lot of traction very quickly on social media, and it was something people wanted to read. It's a difficult read, but it's something people wanted to read in the sense it reinforced what everybody knows already. So everybody knows already. There's now no excuse for ignoring it. There's an industry working group meeting shortly, which David Connolly referred to, which is a coming together of various people. Let's look at how some of the people involved in that industry working group reacted. CIFA, Chartered Institute for Archaeologists, that's the group that oversees professional standards and professional ethics and is a regulator for professional archaeology in Britain. CIFA said, it strongly welcomes the poverty impact report published today by BAJR Jobs, which provides a powerful insight into how the cost of living crisis affects archaeologists. So far, so descriptive. The industry, including CIFA, has a collective responsibility for finding solutions, especially as those long-standing problems are now being magnified by national crisis to the extent that people's lives, their physical and mental well-being, are being fundamentally impacted. We will be looking closely at the information in this report and discussing with the industry working group, and will issue a more detailed response soon. So they're saying, yes, there is a collective responsibility of the kind that David Connolly was referring to in his commentary. Prospect Arcs, which is another participant in these discussions, it's the archaeological branch of the trade union Prospect. They said people wanted data. Here it is. Huge thanks to you, Lou of BAJR and BAJR Jobs team for doing this work voluntarily. How to try and fix? We'll be discussing this at the next industry working group meeting with FAME Arc, Institute Arc, BAJR Jobs and the Diggers Forum. Now, the last two are informal groupings of archaeologists in social media who discuss issues around pay conditions, work, and the actual functioning of primarily developer-funded archaeology. The Institute of Arc, that's CIFA. FAME Arc is the Federation of Archaeology Managers and Employers. Now, I checked just before we started recording this, and up to that time, which is the middle of the afternoon on Friday afternoon, I think 3 days after the report came out, FAME has not mentioned the report either on its social media or on the landing page of its website.
Okay.
Now, I think what we're looking at here is in the real world of archaeology in the construction and development industry, working against a background of industrial and employment law, solutions to this do not lie in the hands of the archaeology community alone. I'll explain why.
Okay.
Basically, even if the commercial archaeological units who are making up this sector, the members of FAME who employ the archaeologists who contributed to the BAJR report, even if they all decided simultaneously they were going to employ contracts which had higher wages, better conditions, and so on, if that was organized across the sector by an organization like FAME, however sympathetic they were as individuals to the plight of their workforce, FAME could be accused of acting as a cartel and price fixing. And the penalties for price fixing include fines of up to 10% of turnover, um, and they could be sued for damages by parties who believe they've been impacted by the price fixing. For example, developers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the level of stuff that we're dealing with here. It's not, oh, let's pay all our archaeologists more. It would be a lovely thing to do. Yes, it would, but it might not be legal. It has to be done very carefully.
And well, and this is why for a long time now, you, others have been pushing for not just magically pay people more, but rather lobby, as we were talking about recently, actually, with regards to the need to demonstrate the value of getting an archaeological degree. Lobby for the value of archaeology, so that the culture shifts, so that developers are inclined to pay more for what is high quality work. But look, as you say, we're at a point now, and someone pointed this out to me on Twitter just before we started recording, where actually we've now got a matter of weeks, possibly, before white papers introduced to Parliament on this issue. That's a very short amount of time to change development culture.
It ain't going to happen.
No. Okay.
Look, and there's a couple of other quick points I make. In terms of, some people have been saying, go out and join a trade union. Now, I would say absolutely. I'm a great believer in trade unions. Whenever I've been in a situation where I've been in a workplace which has had a trade union, I've always joined it. I've always felt it's in the interest of not just me, but also my colleagues, that we work together to try and resolve issues if they arise with employers. Right. So and in the archaeological sector, prospect arcs are very visible. Other trade unions also have a presence. So there are, that is one possibility. But even then, you see, one of the problems with current trade union law, and the government was talking this morning, Kwarteng was talking this morning about making it even more difficult to enter into a trade dispute. But for example, archaeologists can't just go on strike across the sector. Legally, you have to have individual disputes with individual employers. It's not like the university lecturers who have a national issue in their pensions, which are administered centrally. Therefore, they can have a national dispute about pensions. They also have to have local disputes about paying conditions in particular universities.
Yeah.
So, and all of those disputes have to be legally organized with postal ballots, notifications to the employers, and if a union gets it even slightly wrong, they'll end up in court.
Exactly. So therefore, absolute transparency all the way through, which one could say, archaeological leadership hasn't been great at. There's often, we're having private conversations behind the scenes. They worry your pretty little heads about things. That style isn't compatible with a sort of an open, sort of unionized approach to pushing for change in the sector.
Exactly that. And look, there's one other point I think I'd like to make from the report to finish. And I'm sorry, I'd love to be more optimistic about this. I really, really would. We're talking about a sector that I have given much of my adult life to. I've been interested in for most of my sentient life.
Well, but also, can I say, I'm absolutely sympathetic to that in so much as it's also often, for almost everyone I've ever known in this sector, it is it's a lifestyle, it's a compulsion, it's something that you really genuinely love and want to do. But unfortunately, and I'll just sort of tag this on, for example, yesterday I noticed that the Orvik Viking Centre were advertising for volunteers to talk about history and archaeology to people, I think, in the queue and in other places as well outside. We found ourselves in a situation where volunteering, low pay, relying on the public to provide labour at archaeological digs as a commonplace way in which archaeology happens, has got us to a situation where we've been the frog, the apparent frog, which apparently isn't true, but the thing where you slowly increase the heat and the frog will boil alive because it doesn't notice that the temperature is changing around it. I fear that we're in that sort of situation, and not to put too fine a point on it, partly because archaeologists, despite the sort of the jumper wearing, lovey-dovey, huggy appearance of the profession, are actually not very good at playing together. And I really, throughout my entire career, have wanted to see archaeologists playing better together. And hopefully what we're about to see is archaeologists playing better together.
Yeah,
But,
but look,
yeah.
just a couple of things just really to finish. I think we have to be realistic. It's something I've tried to be ever since I got into this kind of archaeological journalism, trying to find out what goes on behind the scenes, and that is that not all archaeologists are the same. Certainly, all archaeologists don't think the same, and to try to Sept and Fame have a common interest in doing good archaeology, but in terms of, and even more so as an organization like Prospect, a trades union, the rights and expectations of individual workers can be promoted by the likes of Sept and Prospect. The members of Fame are dealing with corporate entities that have legal responsibilities and contractual obligations to the developers that they sign contracts with, and also they are in deliberately a competitive market where contracts all too often go to the lowest bidder, and to survive in that market, though, those organizations will find it very difficult often to increase paying conditions. Now, again, credit to Wessex Archaeology, for example, today, which has increased its maternity and paternity benefits. That's fantastic. But they're one of the largest units, and they're able to do that. It's not to knock it. Everybody should be like that, but not everybody economically can be, because it's the kind of thing, because of the cutthroat market, particularly perhaps in the regions and the smaller jobs that don't pay so well, that aren't the big construction jobs that guarantee work for 6 months, a year, 2 years, and an income stream. Other companies aren't in that situation, and
that's partly because the margins are slim, but also as well, people are often, as we've talked about again for years, archaeology is often in a situation where it's paying for the current job based on the promise of the next job.
Indeed,
it's often it's an economy, as it were, that's in arrears. But then again, much of the building sector is very similar. To be fair,
look. When I was doing my masters, my digging component was part of my digging component. My masters was on a site which had been abandoned by a commercial contractor because they had underbid on the contract. Some stuff had turned up which they just literally couldn't afford to do without going under. So they bailed on the contract, and Historic England got my university in to basically clear up after the fire sale.
Yeah.
And so, this has been going on for a long time. But as I say, I think what the report points up, coming out now, as it does at the time of the cost of living crisis hitting, it means this is no longer avoidable, and people have got some very difficult choices to make. And I think there's one other thing I'd just like to finish on, and it's again, it comes out of the growth plan. It's again, we'll link to it so that people can go and read it for themselves.
This is the government growth plan, yeah.
The government growth plan, yeah. The Kwarteng's wish list, let's call it, for how he wants things to go. He announced a series of accelerated transport projects. Now, that immediately tweaked my interest, because I think of a certain high-profile transport project that has been subject to a lot of litigation. Stonehenge.
Oh, okay.
And
see, Loki loves it.
Just fine. Yeah, he loves it. The A303 Stonehenge upgrade is listed on that list of accelerated infrastructure projects, where the government expects construction to begin before the end of 2023, within the next 14 months.
Yeah.
Now, that is interesting on two levels. One is because the decision has not yet been made to give the go-ahead to the project after the most recent judicial review. It was knocked back and sent back to the Transport Secretary for decision. There it is on a government document saying that not only is it going to be given the go-ahead, but it's going to be given the go-ahead in an accelerated way. But also those projects are associated with another element of the deregulation that Kwarteng has suggested will be brought forward, and that is to limit the scope for judicial reviews, like the judicial review which found that the decision to give the go-ahead on the Stonehenge tunnel and dual carriageway upgrade was unlawful.
Yeah. So again, it's a form of deregulation, and yeah.
No, look, I'm going to finish, and I'm sorry to be depressing about this, but I'm going to finish with another thought for our viewer. And it comes directly from the BAJR report. Now, if Kwarteng and the government do pass this legislation, which sunsets things like the Environment Directive, which quote streamlines or liberalizes the environmental assessments around major infrastructure projects in the low tax zones, the free ports, and so on. The issues around archaeology won't be about pay and conditions. It'll be about how many archaeologists are left.
Yeah.
And it's, I think, again, one of the starkest statistics that leapt out to me from the BAJR report is that barely a third of the respondents, only just over 35% of the respondents, felt that they were confident that they will be able to continue a career in professional archaeology.
Yeah. Well, and presumably Connolly's tweet, #enough is enough, it's time we all work together. Unfortunately, we did request or put out some feelers asking if he was up for a bit of a chat about this report yesterday or today. And as far as I can tell, he hasn't seen or hasn't responded to my request. So
the invitation remains open, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. The invitation remains open. Not least because it is time we all work together. Full stop. It is. It simply is.
And the report, it's an important piece of work coming at the right time. There are 2 more reports coming forward in the near future. One from Prospect about pay across the wider heritage sector, including museums and so on, heritage and cultural sector, and also a report that has been commissioned by CIFA using money from Historic England, and that is looking into inequalities in archaeology. But that's being done by a professional consultancy.
Yeah, but you were saying that cost about 12 grand. So this, even just assessing the state of play is not an inexpensive thing. Yeah. So again,
this is why Prospect and BAJR have had to go down the informal self-selecting online survey route to come up with this kind of work, because to get it done to a standard that will pass muster with the with advertising agencies and so on and academically, it's beyond the ability of those organisations to pay for them.
Well, precisely because of the subject of the need for the report as well, because there's no money. But
exactly, irony upon irony.
But hence, though, Prospect quite rightly congratulates BAJR on what was a voluntary effort. Absolutely,
as we should all. Yeah, as we should all.
Absolutely. Okay, so conversation below, folks. Please do continue the conversation below.
I think there might be a few things that people might want to comment on today.
Yeah, well, hopefully, and also as well suggestions if for people who are in the next few weeks going to be facing these meaty quandaries. Comment. Let's hear it. Let's expand the suggestions. And
always, I would say, if you don't want to comment publicly but do want to tip us off about anything that's going on in archaeology, privately, unattributably, my DMs are open. There are other ways of contacting us. So please, don't again, like in all this, if you're worried about something, if you're scared about something that's happening to the archaeology, to your company, or whatever, you think something shouldn't be happening that is, there are people who can help understand, deal with those kind of situations. Obviously, we're on the news element. There are also the organizations that support people who have, for example, mental health issues and so on as well. And there are some, they're quite well known now, and there are good organizations and good websites with links and so on. And perhaps we should link to some of those too below, because this is a really, really tough time for everyone.
Well, yeah, and so in that sense, yeah, there was a reason for content warnings. These ideas and thoughts and feelings often tend to isolate people in their heads.
Yeah, exactly.
So don't let yourself be isolated. Do reach out and talk to people. So, do you think next week we may well be actually talking about the tower? Oh, come on!
Look, since we tried to talk about the tower, we've had a new prime minister and the Queen died.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. Maybe we shouldn't talk about the tower ever. Oh my goodness! Yeah, holy moly!
It's become maybe it's become some kind of totem-esque thing that is destroying the country. As we,
indeed, word has it that when the tower is spoken of, the world will end. Yeah. Okay, we'll see what happens.
Come on, don't. We've already had Putin and the head of Russian state TV talking about nuclear war this week, for Christ's sake.
So what are those numbers for her mental health? I'll just go and find them. No,
we'll put it below the line.
Yeah. And we'll see what happens next week. Until then, guys, do take care. As I say, do comment below. Do reach out to people if you need to. And let's all try and work together. Bye-bye.
We'll do our best. Bye-bye.
Can we get to our mastermind, Sybil? Next contestant, Sybil Fordy from Torquay. Special subject, the bleeding obvious. I wasn't going to let it go in the